Hey, good afternoon. My name is Spencer Hallman. I'm a product manager for BMC. I manage, if that's the right term, the product called Z Advisor. It's actually a service that we provide for all of our BMC CompuWare customers. Prior to being a product manager, I was the SME for Mainframe application performance, and then prior to that, I was field technical support for a product called Strobe. So for the first 2/3 of my career at CompuWare and BMC, I was in Mainframe application performance, and then when we were acquired by a company called Thoma Bravo, they needed more product managers, and I sort of got a battlefield commission. So I went to product manager or product owner school, and halfway through, I asked my boss if I was going to be a product manager or product owner, and he said it would appear that way. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years of my career with BMC and CompuWare. So today I'm here to talk about integrating the next generation with the greatest generation. And if you're coming from a mainframe organization, I think your probably experience is the same as mine. From 2000 to probably 2010, maybe even 2015. It was generally the same people that were sitting in the seats that they're sitting in today. And their hair was getting grayer and grayer. And not a whole lot of new blood was coming into the organization. And then around 2015, I think people started looking and saying, you know what, we need to start backfilling these people. And so they started bringing in what I would call the next generation. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so when we talk about the greatest generation, this really goes back to a book that Tom Brokaw wrote, probably back, I think it came, Amazon is correct, I think it came out in 2000 or 2001, and it was about, the soldiers and people that basically, built America to what it was, during and after World War II. And when I think of the greatest generation, I think of a picture like this, somebody sitting at a 3270 terminal. It's always black and white. And they were the ones that basically created the processes and the procedures and built the mainframe to what it is today. And have you ever noticed too, whenever someone wants to, somebody not familiar with the mainframe wants to put a picture up of the mainframe, it's always a black and white picture, and it's usually somebody in a suit and tie standing next to a 3270 tape drive. So I wrote a LinkedIn post once on that, and I always found that interesting. But, really what they should be putting up there is a picture of like the Z16, which is a really cool looking, device. And, if you look at the features or what the Z16 can do, people would be blown away by that. But these guys, people like this, they are the ones that built the mainframe to what it is today. So, the fact that it is as reliable as it is, the 5 nines, 99.999% reliable, hardly ever comes down. It only comes down when we ask it to, we have to apply maintenance or we have to, do something. And so this greatest generation, they are our application SMEs. And so they are, they're getting close to retirement if they haven't already retired. I know in my organization, we're seeing more and more retiring. In fact, we have a whole bunch of them retiring in a couple of days. But these are the people that, for me, and I'm sure for you as well, they understand the applications. They have this knowledge, this tribal knowledge of this application that is unmatched by anybody else in the organization. There's a gentleman that I used to work with. He's since retired now. His name was Earl, and we looked at Earl, and he was kind of like Gandalf. We would sit there in our sprint planning, and we would be talking about, how long do we think it's going to take for us to get this story done? And Earl would look at that story. It's like, well, I could probably do it in a day. And everybody else in this room who was generally, significantly younger than him, said, well, it is going to take anybody else that's going to do this probably about 5 days to do it. And it wasn't meant as a dig against anyone else in the room. It was just meant to be that I know how to get this done and I can get it done really quickly. And for this greatest generation, their tool of choice is that 3270 emulator. So they can, it's like, a classical pianist playing, Beethoven's Fifth, and they can make that 3270 emulator hum. They like legacy SCMs too. They don't GIT is almost a 4-letter word to them. I know it's a 3-letter word, but it's a 4-letter word to them. But they want that legacy SCM, be it Changeman or Endeavor or ISPW or even some homegrown SCM, or even I've run into customers who have just store their source code in PDSs, and they like the waterfall software development methodology. So they want to be able to basically tell them what you want, and then they will deliver it, whether that's in 3 months or 6 months or next year. And that doesn't work well for product management, because we like to deliver things quicker than that. So that's the greatest generation, and now we're starting to see an influx in the next generation. I know for my company, we really made an effort, probably starting 5 or 6 years ago, to get the next generation in. We went out to college campuses, we participated in job fairs, and we brought new blood into the organization, kids directly out of college, and we would put them through a boot camp of mainframe assembler and Cobol. And so today, when we look at the next generation, these are younger people. They don't have gray hair. They have dark hair. They got all their hair in most cases, and so that's what they are. And they have different needs than what the greatest generation has. So they grew up using a modernized user interface, whether that was Eclipse or VS Code or some other version. Something that was modernized. My son, when he started when he took a programming class in high school, it was Java, and then he asked me for some help, and I noticed it's like, oh, you're using Eclipse, and this is going back probably 7, 8 years, but it was like I knew we have some Eclipse interfaces, so I could understand, and I could get around it, and I didn't really understand Java, but I could help him with the Eclipse piece of it. But they want that modernized user interface, and 3270 to them sometimes is a huge turnoff. They want to use a modern software development methodology. So when I was talking to some of our next generation at our company, I'm like, what do you guys do? Are you familiar with this agile thing? And they're like, oh yeah, we would do with that, we would participate with that in college. So they're really familiar with the agile software development methodology. They like to attack development in a team fashion. They like to work in those short sprints, those 1, 2, 3 week sprints, getting the work done. And they also want to be able to understand where they're going before they get there. So sometimes when as a product manager, I would put stories out there without explaining to them that, well, we're doing this because we need to get here. And so it's important when we're talking to them too, to be able to tell them that we're doing this because we need to be able to do that. And then a code analysis tool. As I was practicing this presentation, this was kind of one. It's like, oh yeah, this is a really important piece. So those that greatest generation who are application SMEs, right? They understand the application. So we can bring that next generation in, and we can teach them Cobol, right? And if they're a computer science major, they're going to probably pick up Cobol really quickly. They've learned the syntax of all computer languages. A for while, a for next loop is pretty much the same in Java as it is in C, as it is in Cobol. Your while loops, they're generally the same too. The syntax is slightly different, right? But it's relatively the same. What they don't have, though, is the understanding of the application. So they don't understand what are the business rules, or what is the intent of that the code is trying to do. And so they require, some sort of program analysis or code analysis tool to help them better understand how the program processes and how they can either enhance it or fix a bug in it. And then they want a modern SCM, so they want to be able to use Git. And my colleague Tony talked about this yesterday around the same time. He talked about Git. And how it's basically it's the future SCM. It's something that is getting more and more traction in the organization. but it's what the next generation has learned on, right? So in college, they probably had their own Git accounts, and they were, storing their source code in Git. And then they want automation as well. They want to be able to, once they are done with the code, they want to be able to, kick off some sort of pipeline to have that code tested and then deployed to production. When I was in school programming, trying to get through my computer science classes, I would create my own little scripts, right, to, compile the program, link the program, and finally execute the program. And then I just had to go and check the output to make sure it was right, or what, more times than not, it wasn't. But I didn't have a debugger, but I had this little script that I would, these scripts that I would create and I would submit. And so they things have come a long way where, you can have automation today. You can have an orchestrator like Jenkins or CloudBees or Azure DevOps and be able to submit these things and then just have a whole set of tools run to capture to do a specific task. So today's workforce looks amazingly like this. There's generally a lot of people in the organization with white hair or gray hair, and then there's a lot of people in the organization that have all their hair and it's generally not gray. And so one is the future, and one is going to make sure that the future is bright. And there's one other piece in this, and that's the organization. And if the organization has a mainframe, they've probably been around for at least 40 years or longer, and obviously longer. But they want to be competitive in the marketplace, right? They want to be agile. So they want to be able to respond to what the market wants. They want to be able to put products out that the market wants as well, be it something on your phone or browser-based, but they want to be agile and they want to be able to put stuff out, and they want to be able to put it out quickly. Their applications span the enterprise, meaning that there are systems of engagement that are not generally the mainframe, but they are web applications that or apps on your phone that are going to, cause some sort of activity that's going to cause something to occur on the mainframe, which is our system of record. And as part of that, the mainframe has to be able to move as quickly as the rest of the enterprise. And I don't know if you recall, but probably about 5 or 6 years ago, Gartner had this idea, of two-speed IT, right? I don't know if any of you remember that, but it was this idea that the distributed side or the system engagement side, right, they're agile, they're going to move as quickly as they can. And then the mainframe, they're never going to want to do this agile thing. So what they want to do is that we'll just keep them in waterfall, and they'll just, plod along like they always do. And the part they really didn't think through, though, is that in order for the system engagement side to move really fast, they need the mainframe to move just as fast. And then and I remember going to some shows, like some of those IBM big tent conferences they have out at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. The mainframe people would get up there and they would talk about this, and they're like, we hate this idea. Because we want to be just like the cool kids, right? Even though we've been around for a while and we've done waterfall forever, we still want to be like the cool kids, and we want to bring the mainframe along with the distributed side as well. So thankfully that two-speed IT thing sort of petered out. So that gives me a kick. I come to this now for the idea for this presentation. So I graduated from Midland Park High School in 1984. And prior to my 25-year reunion, it was probably about 6 months before, I was on a sales call at one of our customers, and I'm sitting in this room, not too much unlike this, and I'm sitting at one table, and there's it's kind of a U-shaped setup, and I'm looking across the room, and there's a woman sitting there, and I'm like, wow, she looks really familiar, and it's like I couldn't quite figure out her name, and I kept thinking, and I was probably staring more than I probably should be staring. But I noticed she was staring at me, too. So she was having, that same, awkward stare at me, which hardly ever happens. But So she was staring at me, and finally I figured it out. It was like her name was Chris, and I went to high school with her. Last time I saw her was in 1984 when we graduated. And so there was a break, and I got up, and I went over, and I talked to her, and I said, Chris, and she said, Spencer. And so then, we started talking, idle chit-chat. And then, the meeting went on, and then, we said our goodbyes. And then a couple months later, I was at at my 25-year reunion, and I ran into her again, and I was talking to her, and I'm like, oh, we have these Eclipse interfaces, because she was a developer for this organization. And so, you can debug your program in this modernized interface using, Eclipse, and it's point and shoot, and you can, double-click, and you can set a breakpoint. And I said, it's really cool. And she's like, I don't want any part of that. She goes, I have my 3270 emulator, and I have all these macros built, and I can do a Control-Shift-M, and that will, set a breakpoint or compile the program. And it's like she had it down to, she was a concert pianist, right? She had it down to a science to make that 3270 emulator work the way that she wanted to. And then it occurred to me, right? Just because we think, these modernized interfaces look like, the greatest thing since sliced bread, to some people, they're not. And it may actually be a hindrance to them as they are doing their day-to-day activities. So we got to be careful about forcing people to use these modernized interfaces. We need to build them because we need to offer them for the next generation. But, for that greatest generation, we need to be careful about what we force them to do, because if you give them Eclipse or VS Code or Git, you may take their productivity and throw it in the trash can. And then they're going to get frustrated, and they say, you know what, I've been around long enough, and I got enough money, I'm just going to retire and call it a career. So thanks very much. Or maybe even go find a new job. And that was what the idea for this presentation was. And so now, how do we support these three groups? The organization, the next generation, and the greatest generation. So the greatest generation, as I mentioned before, my friend Chris, it's the 3270 emulator. Don't force any other interface on them or give them a choice. Let them decide whether they want to go to, what we think is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Let them use that 3270 emulator. Then the next generation, depending on when they came out of school, they're going to be familiar with one or the other. They're either going to be familiar with Eclipse or VS Code. I think VS Code came out around 2015, and people coming out of school now obviously are using VS Code. VS Code is a lightweight. It's fast. It's much quicker probably than Eclipse, especially if you have to install it on your PC. And so even people that are using Eclipse today or yesterday, they might be more than happy to go to VS Code. But the idea, though, is to offer them a choice. Give it, if you got Eclipse, great. If you got VS Code, great. And if they want to use 3270, maybe they use 3270, because sometimes there's things you can't do in Eclipse or in VS Code that you need to go to 3270 for. Source code management. And I stole this slide from Tony. But, the greatest generation, right, they want that legacy SCM system, that Changeman, ISPW, Endeavor, the homegrown SCM, that thing that's been around forever, right? And it's been customized and customized and customized to the point that nobody even really understands the customization anymore, but it works, right? They know that when they put their code, or they check their code in, it's going to get compiled, it's going to get linked, and it's going to get promoted up, and then maybe testing kicks off, and then maybe eventually it gets promoted to production. So for the future, that's probably not going to work, right? The greatest generation is going to retire in the near future, and the next generation is going to take over, and they want that Git-only approach, right? They've been using Git forever. They like Git. I don't know if you guys have ever used Git. I used it a little bit at one point, and I swear to God, I had to have someone give me the same lessons on it, 3 separate times before I finally understood it. And it's really, it's all about muscle memory. You got to remember, okay, I'm going to do my changes, and then I'm going to do I think it was, you got to commit and then push and pull. I sort of made an analogy to, my wife giving birth. I don't know if it was quite that bad, though. It wasn't bad for my wife. I mean, it was bad for me with the Git. But anyway, Git works well, and the next generation really likes Git. However, the greatest generation looks at Git, and they're going to be very skeptical of it. So they're not going to be interested in that. So you need really kind of that hybrid approach that Tony was talking about yesterday. You have Team A, and they're going to want that traditional SCM, and they're going to want, maybe using ISPW for their version control, and it'll go through that process that it's gone through for years, if not decades. And then you got Team B that's going to want to use Git. And so you can use Git for the version control, but still use, your back-end legacy SCM for building and deploying the source code on the mainframe. And then, I don't know if you've seen this, I think everybody has a version of this, the Devops tool chain, right? There's no reason why the greatest generation and the next generation and the organization itself can't participate in this tool chain. And this is where we can automate. There's no reason, there's nothing bad about automation, especially when you're talking about the greatest generation or the next generation, right? Being able to, automate the testing of the applications, being able to automate the deployment of the application, I think you're going to get a thumbs up from everybody. Nobody likes to test, especially, right? So, especially the greatest generation, right? Telling them that they have to go test their products, they're probably going to look at it and say it's good and push it along until somebody reports a bug. But you need to, think about the tool chain. And the distributed side of the organization, the system engagement side, they already have this tool chain in place, and they're using it. What we need to do is co-opt that same tool chain and use the same, there's probably the same tools that they're using today can be used for the mainframe in places. And so the strategy is the user interface, right? I mean, this seems simple, right? Allow the user to choose their own user interface. So depending on who the person is, whether they're the greatest generation or the next generation, let them make that choice. And then the SCM, you got to think about today, but you also got to think about tomorrow and the future. And today it's about the legacy SCMs, but you need that legacy SCM also that can interact with Git, work with Git, and you can then start to think about implementing Git in a staged fashion. And then finally, automation is implement that modern DevOps pipeline. And the other thing I left off of here is that being able to, a tool that can help that next generation understand the applications. So that's my presentation. There's my contact information. If you have a question or anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you at any time, and I appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.